The human story is the search for belonging. From childhood to adulthood, in joy and in struggle, we all sit in questions of how to make sense of it all. What is our place? Why are we here? What is our story of searching? Join us in conversation with community members, each sharing some of their own story. I am Ben Spratt, and this is Belonging.
It is such an honor and truly a gift to get to be with two of my beloved friends, mentors, teachers, and real legends of this congregation, Richard Lustig and Barbara Lustig. There is no way that we can tell the story of the two of you without really telling the story of this entire community. So Richard, your family is a 5-generation family here at Rodeph Sholom that goes all the way back as a founding family when Rodeph Sholom was on Clinton Street. And throughout the generations, you've risen to be a model of this congregation. You served on our board of trustees, you helped chair the membership and foundation committees, and even as you continue to be on our emeritus board. Even more importantly, in many ways, you have had a lifetime of growing up as a bar mitzvah and confirmand here, and then ensuring your children and grandchildren are woven into the ethos of Rodeph Sholom. Along the way, you also served in the Army. You were part of the Signal Corps, specializing in, I believe, cryptography and film. And before you went to the Army, you were helping to chaperone at a Purim Carnival here at Congregation Rodeph Sholom, where you met one of the teen youth groupers, the amazing Barbara. And so your love story really started within these walls and has continued through these walls. And I know that you and Barbara just celebrated 64 years of marriage earlier this month. And Barbara, your family goes back 4 generations here. And your family has generations also of modeling leadership, sharing so many elements of the congregation. Your mother actually helped to be one of the founders of the nursery school, and you yourself have actually held almost every position within these walls. I'm pretty sure you told me the story that one of our former senior rabbis, Rabbi Louis Newman, actually jokingly said, Barbara Lustig, she served as president of everything except for the men's club. And Barbara, under your leadership, we have not only seen you rise as a trustee of this congregation, but also as an adult bat mitzvah of this congregation. And you've held many leadership roles, including president of various organizations and the founder of our very own Prominent Women's series. Your story, Barbara and Richard, is a story of 2 people who have grown up with a love of community and chosen to turn that love of community into the strengthening of it and perpetuating it for the next generations. As one of so many who have been shaped and changed and embraced by the 2 of you, it is such a blessing to have you with us today, and for listeners here to get to hear a bit of your journey in search of belonging. Welcome, and so grateful.
Rabbi, this has been such an honor for Richard and I, and being part of this community and seeing it grow the way it has, and we are honored beyond all measure to be here as your guests.
What a blessing to be with you both. So as you know, this is a podcast about belonging, and would love, Barbara, to begin with you to hear about your search for belonging.
There was no question in my life that Rodeph Sholom was our spiritual home. My father was brought up as an Orthodox Jew. My mother was brought up at Rodeph Sholom. And when it came to raising their children, it was here at Rodeph Sholom where we came. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to have formal Jewish education. But the truth is that our family was very immersed in the tradition of Judaism. First of all, both my parents were leaders here. My mother was president of the Parents Association. During her tenure, she founded the nursery school. My father was president of Brotherhood, but I had a special privilege. As a member of the youth group, I was asked to be a delegate to the Board of Trustees. So I have actually sat on the Board of Trustees since I'm 14 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And now I'm a member of the board, honorary member of the board, and now an emeritus member. So it's been a wonderful time, and seeing the congregation change in so many ways has been quite extraordinary.
So what did they say as they saw you at age 14 being a delegate to the board, as they saw you grow up and not only find the love of your life within these walls, but then choose to be a leader of it? Did they ever comment to you? Did they offer their reflections?
Yes, it was very interesting because when I met Richard, and he was a chaperone at the Purim Carnival when I was 15, I remember at that same night, Richard met my parents. The next day he came to have brunch at my parents' home, met my grandmother. But when my parents saw that Richard was really interested in me, and I was a junior at Music and Art at the time, my mother called her very dear friend Lucille Newman. And they said, your neighbor is very interested in Barbara, and there's quite an age difference. He's in business, already finished with college. Can you tell me about him? He's wonderful, a great family. And Lucille said to my mother, and and her words were, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. We've seen wonderful marriages at 18, and we've seen ones that weren't so successful at 35. So that's the way we met. And when Richard was drafted into the Army, my parents agreed that we could be married. He asked my parents very formally. And because he was going to be stationed at the moment in Georgia, I was going to finish, or begin actually, my college years at the University of Georgia. There was a branch in Augusta. And one of the most wonderful things there was that Rabbi Newman called ahead to the rabbi in Augusta and said we had this young couple. We're going to be at the Army base. Barbara could sing in your choir, and she comes from a family very devoted to Judaism. And the congregation embraced us. I sang in the choir. Richard was in the Army. I had my whole life was just embraced, even from a distance, from Rabbi Newman and Rodeph Sholom.
Oh, beautiful. So even from afar, Rodeph Sholom was still holding together and holding you together, and you were still building community wherever you went.
Yes.
It's amazing. So, Richard, I'd love to hear about your search for belonging.
Well, I did not come from a family that was heavily into Judaism. My father was in World War I. A shell landed near him, and they found him in a hospital in France. He had lost his memory, and it took a while for him to gain his speech and whatever back. His father was the founder of Temple Bethel in Glens Falls. As I said before, my father was not well. His father must have been fairly religious to start that temple, but it didn't seem to rub off on him. My mother, on the other hand, was instrumental in me going to Rodeph Sholom. We started off on 79th Street near Mount Nebo, I believe it was. And then my father moved us to 271 Central Park West, where we discovered Rabbi Newman was right above us. So every time there was a wedding at his house, the chandeliers would shake when they broke the glass. One day, Ellen Freed, I think her name was, she was a director of the religious school. She came to me and asked if I would chaperone the Purim Carnival that was going on. And I was walking around and I saw this lovely-looking young lady, and I pursued her. I don't know how many dates we had. And I fell in love with her family because I love sports, and Barbara's father was a professional football player, so it came as a natural. So we dated, and then I asked Barbara if she would marry me. I said, I'll ask your father. He says, oh, you have to ask my sister, too. So
I have to tell you a funny story, if I may, about when we were dating. My parents had a summer house in New Jersey, so my parents were expecting us for the weekend. So we were getting ready to leave the Lustigs and go to my parents' home on the Jersey Shore. And Richard had a suitcase in one hand and me in the other hand. And in the back of the elevator at 271 was Rabbi Newman, who stood with his hands crossed. And he said, I hope you children aren't planning anything foolish. And that was we never really got out of the eyes of anyone in the synagogue.
You never met Rabbi Newman, did you?
Sadly, no.
He was a very tall gentleman. And when he spoke, it was like God. You know, he had a deep voice. And he was a lovely man. He really was.
So we were married by Rabbi Newman and Cantor Hirschberg. And half the congregation was at our wedding. It was very, very special. And we went on our honeymoon, and after that, we went directly to Georgia.
So from my vantage point, from the moment that I entered this community, one of the elements about the two of you that has been most dazzling is your profound love for one another. It is simply a love that exudes into every space, the way that you look at each other, the way that you hold each other's hands, the way that you see that your path in life is always defined by your togetherness. And I was just wondering if we could talk a little bit, if you're willing, about how you created such a magnificent marriage and how you have allowed that love to live so loudly in the spaces around you. For so many of us in our search for belonging, a lot of it is about learning both how we can be loved and to love in return. So 64 years of marriage, but not just that, 64 years of romance and passion and joy and struggle that you have walked through all of that together. Teach us the ways. Tell us.
One of the things that we were blessed with were marvelous examples. Carolyn and Julian Lustig were devoted parents to Richard and Arlene. My parents, Pearl and David, were wonderful examples and took care. My grandma Molly, who lived with us after my grandpa Julius passed away, and I remember Richard going with my father to buy a car, and Grandma Molly's wheelchair wouldn't fit in the trunk, and although he loved that car, he did not buy it. It was the kind of devotion that we have always felt. We have tried very hard to be supportive and show that respect and love to our children as well. Stephen and Donald, we were very, shall I say, not helicopter parents, but we were at all the athletic events, whether it was Donald's football game at Johns Hopkins or Stephen's sailing for Brandeis. We tried to always be involved, and lovingly so. But we have tried very hard, always to be there for each other.
Beautiful. And I'm wondering, Richard, we had a conversation, it was about a year after I got married. So it was about 18 years ago, I think. And we were talking about marriage, and you were wanting to know a little bit more about Micah, and Micah is a cantor and strong, intelligent, creative, thoughtful person. And one of the things that I was so struck by is you immediately spoke about what it was, in your words, Barbara's strength and dedication and devotion in all spaces. And I was also thinking about that move of how do we look at the people that we are connected to, and whether it's romantically in marriage or friends and things, and how do we create the space in ourselves to look with admiration about the gifts that they bring into the world. So, Richard, I'd love to know, how did you get to a place of enough integrity and confidence in yourself that you could simply turn to look into Barbara's eyes and simply just want the world to see and celebrate her?
I am amazed every time I look at Barbara, because her accomplishments never end. And she's a wonderful leader. She's an excellent mother and a wonderful wife, a wonderful companion. And she gets better every day. And,
thank you.
I think it was Barbara that sort of inspired me to go further into Judaism. And I took on chairman of membership and seating and a few other positions. And Barbara, we found that we did not compete with one another. Our expertise were a little different, But we raised two wonderful children who went on to make us very proud.
That is true. Stephen and Donald grew up here in the synagogue and feel it's their home. In fact, when Stephen and Tracy were married, they were married in our sanctuary. I think it's important to know that in our house, for example, Richard will say to me, honey, the Yankee game goes on at 8 o'clock, or the Stanley Cups are going on, so that we have managed, whether it's being active at the Historical Society or at Hunter College or whatever, we balance, and we've always done that. And I think it has come from when I was a student and he was in the Army. I was able to be an honor student and do well because I wasn't dating. I wasn't trying to combine an outside life. Richard was in the Army. I was in school. We had our paths. We respected what we had to do. Richard was always respectful. If there was something going on, he knew I had to study. He knew I had a paper due. That's the kind of support from the beginning. And I think that continued as we progressed, whether it was an educational event, whether it was a sporting event, whether it was a cultural event, going to the opera, whatever it was, we respected the fact this is your night, this is your program, we'll get together later, and we do that now as well.
So you both have seen different eras of the city, different eras of this congregation. And I was wondering if you could tell us the story of the two of you in a New York City that has been evolving and changing. And what does it mean to be lifelong New Yorkers and see it through so many different experiences? And, I think even, I started my journey here at Rodeph Sholom about a month before September 11th, 2001. And over the course of these past 23 years, I've seen different chapters of the city. You have seen so many different decades, different mayors, different leadership, different realities, different challenges, different ways in which people express their New York pride. I'd love to hear, what have you seen change over these years?
Well, in growing up, I remember, I think it was the 3rd Avenue had an elevated train, subway. That's no longer there. And I remember double-decker buses along the west side, but they were proven later not to be too safe. In turning, they may lean too far. And also there were trolley cars on Broadway and overhead wires that would supply the electricity. They paved over the tracks, and that was gone. I don't think we had Uber or Lyft, taxis. We didn't have outdoor cafes. It was pretty simple. Barbara says that my sister and brother-in-law are going to Israel, and we'll be communicating on our little phones.
WhatsApp.
Yeah. That's one of the biggest changes I know of. And every day something new is popping up.
Well, I'll say that September 11th was quite a horrible time, as you know. And I remember that day I was going to a meeting at Hunter. And on the bus they made an announcement that there was going to be a detour. They didn't even know what had happened. And I got to York Avenue, and you could see smoke rising in the distance. We didn't know that it was a terrorist attack. And I was on the phone with Stephen's wife. And I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "There's been an attack. There are troops. There are all kinds of things going on in Washington. How are you?" I said, "We're all right. I'm going back home right now." All of a sudden, a young lady ran over to me. She said, are you on a call? Don't hang up. Don't hang up. I said, "I won't hang up. What's the matter?" She said, "I worked at the Trade Center." She said, "My mother is in Salt Lake City. She doesn't know whether I'm at work or not. Please, whoever it is, have them call my mother and say that I'm okay." And that was the beginning of that day. And then we all came to services here at Temple. And very dear friends, Jane Eisner, Bram, who went to school with Richard, his son-in-law, Brian Murphy, died on that day. Doug Neiman's was at a meeting here and didn't go to... yes, he didn't go to his office. I believe it was Cantor Fitzgerald at the Trade Center. So many things happened on that day. And when you brought that up, I remember it so distinctly. Yeah. Everything is not always rosy in life. And I lost my mother to a unfortunate complication. She broke her hip, and the clots went from her hip to her heart, and my father passed away 15 months later. So I became the matriarch of the family and a leader here. But as our children grew up and were married, and we're so blessed with our grandchildren, and what was wonderful was that our boys, Stephen and Donald, had such a rapport with Rabbi Hirschberg at the time, of course, and Canterbury Ron, that when Stephen's children became bar and bat mitzvahed in Virginia, they invited Canterbury Ron and Paula not only as guests, but that Ephraim could do the blessing of the Kiddush at their synagogue. And so the feeling of community has been generational. And I think that that's what makes us happiest, that our friends, like the Harkavies and the Lichtensteins who've passed away, of course, the Zuckermans, so many families, the Zabars. And I don't want to mention any more because I'm afraid I'll leave out some of our dearest friends, but it's just been terrific. And I remember being on the cantorial search committee, and I remember seeing when I was an overseer at the Board of Overseers at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And in that role, I was able to do admissions. One of the people that I admitted, thank God, was Shana Pavey, who is now our senior cantor, Shana DeLow. And seeing her progress from one stage to the other and then to be your partner here is just so wonderful. And the other thing that I was able to do, which I felt so strongly about, was to make sure that cantors received the same honor that rabbis did after 25 years. At the time, they were not, and I thought they go to Israel together, they have their studies together, they respect each other as members of the clergy, and it's only right. And so that was another thing that I felt very strongly about.
It's unbelievable when we talk about our grandchildren, and to think of them, they're in their 20s now. And as you get older, time seems to pass very fast. Really. When you look back on your life and you say, I can't believe I did this, or I did this or that, or I can't believe I accomplished all this. I look back at when we started our marriage and where we are now, and it's unbelievably, I can't believe we did all this, and yet we have.
And I think this is part of what I want to affirm in you both, is you have seen this congregation through different leadership, through different challenges, through moments when we've had to find ways of opening wider the doors of belonging. Under your lifetime here, you have seen the rise of female clergy, openly queer clergy. Yes. You have seen us embarking on a journey of trying to embrace a racial diversity that reflects world Jewry. And to see that as we've tried to create greater embrace for disability and accommodations and belonging for people of all needs, it is an ever-changing world around us, and we have the orientation either of trying to block what is inevitable, or instead, as you were saying, Barbara, how do we look at our agency to move that change forward towards the better?
If you embrace the fact that it's a blessing to be here, and it's very important to be positive. Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, doing things that you can. You can't change everything, but you have to make a stand, whether it's in a conversation or physically going and doing something, because we are blessed. My parents didn't live that long. We cherish every moment. When the phones came out, I realized I have to know how to email. I have to know how to text. I want to be in touch with my grandchildren. So, for example, the Stanley Cup playoffs were just on. And so instead of just calling, Richard and Matthew and Donald and Stephen are on their phones sending messages. I'm sending emojis of hockey sticks and goals and so forth. It was wonderful. It was terrific.
I want to share one of hundreds of stories that I could share with our listeners that we've had the chance to be with and really experience together. But I want to share a recent experience. So a number of weeks ago, I had the honor of getting to be a part of a program over at the Stryker Center at Temple Emmanuel. And as I was instructed, I got there nice and early. And who was there waiting to make sure they were the first in the door, but the two of you. And I thought for a moment of what it was to sit with two people who have been my beloved friends, who have shown me the very best of Rodeph Sholom, and what it was for you to be there because you wanted for me to feel support and to have familiar faces.
Exactly.
But because you also are people who are always wanting to grow and learn. And when I was sitting there on the stage and getting to be in conversation, and I looked out and I saw the two of you holding each other's hands with huge smiles on your faces, and I think about what it is to grow up in this community, to see a world that is ever changing, a congregation that is ever changing, and to continue to embrace generation after generation of leaders and wanting to make sure that you can inspire in us the very best of what we and this place can be. This is a congregation that has been changed by both of your families and by the two of you. And as one of many rabbis, as one of many clergy people that have grown up in this place, I want to offer profound gratitude for having an orientation of leading with love, of being able to celebrate a congregation not just because of being anchored in what has been, but taking that as the source of strength so that we continue to evolve into what we need to be. And you both just dynamically show that every single time we get to step into your home, when you welcome us into the very heart of this sanctuary space with your smiles and your love and your radiance.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has truly been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and listening to this story of belonging. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me on Twitter at Ben H. Spratt. For more information about CRS, visit us online at rodeph sholom.org.